Welcome to Breakpoint this week. I'm Shane Morris, and I'm here with John Stonestreet to talk about the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. Follow the stories we're talking about at breakpoint.org, where you'll find commentaries every day and resources to help you live and think like a Christian in today's culture. And John, I think it's kind of up in the air now after the single vice presidential debate, whether there will be any more presidential debates. They're kind of wrangling over whether there's going to be an online debate or another in-person debate. But if there is another in-person debate, I really hope that unexpected insects are involved in this one as well, because you were tweeting about one that made an appearance in the vice presidential debate. I did not catch it. I went and watched the highlights afterwards, but everyone seemed to be talking about the fly.
Oh, the fly was the star of the debate. It was amazing, honestly.
I think NPR had the best
Pastor,
headline. They said the fly causes unexpected buzz.
yeah, there was a
Sorry.
lot of there was a lot of those really bad puns. Mine was the stage is bugged. It was just really something. I did think that there was a real failure of the moderator not to pull out one of those really cool salt shooter
Oh,
fly
I've
killer.
always wanted one of those
Just
things.
oh man, I just saw one the other day in one of the cool like farm stores here that
Yeah.
I love. I love going in there and pretending like I live and on a farm somewhere, and it had one. I almost bought it, and it was so cool. But I mean, wouldn't it be great if the moderator had pulled it out and just
Just
uh,
blasted Mike Pence's hair and
yeah,
gotten rid of the
Pastor,
fly.
I tweeted something about it, and Pastor JD Greer from Summit Church in Raleigh responded. I couldn't, I couldn't concentrate, for somebody else was like, did you noticed it too? I'm like, noticed it. I literally could not see or hear anything else when that fly was just stuck there for a really long time.
Doesn't that say something about this year's political process, though? The fact that we're so hungry for distraction that we'll jump after something so trivial and
Something like
stupid
that.
in the debate. This debate, John, I have to say that the comment I saw most often after the fly was about the relative calmness and civility of the thing. I mean, it felt like 2004 or 2008 2012 debate. It was very much about policy issues. There were some barbs traded, but on the whole, both participants seemed to stick with the rules of the debate. The moderator kept track of things, and it was, I don't know, it was kind of normal. We didn't have any. It was nothing like the legendary debates back with Sarah Palin and, gosh, was it John Edwards? Who was the running mate
Yeah.
back then? Those were too great, but this one, I don't think a lot of particularly memorable moments emerged from it. Maybe you disagree.
I thought it was helpful. I mean, I think there's a couple key moments. I mean, one is we had another debate, and it was actually really, really clear. Probably the only memorable thing from the first presidential debate, at least in a kind of pro-Trump way, was the question about stacking the Supreme Court. And Vice President Biden absolutely refused to answer it, and that was a very clear, I'm not going to answer this question. In fact, he was actually
Yeah,
asked
yeah.
later on this week, and in a by a member of the media, and he's not going to answer that question. And I think the reason is they don't want to commit to one side or the other, depending on what happens with the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett. And that was pretty blatant. That was huge. On the other hand, the first segment of the debate, which was about the COVID issue, was a hard one for the vice president. As the leader of the task force, and to have something like what happened at the Rose Garden event, I mean, that's a hard thing to defend. That was probably his weakest moment, and I think just on a political sense, the rest of the debate, I thought he was quite strong, and Senator Harris was not. So, but what was appreciated about that? Here's the question that I have: the first presidential debate, was so unhelpful. Does that mean everyone tuned out for the remainder of them, or did more people tune in and are going to get some information from this one because the policy distinctions were so clear? I mean, that's what came out of the debate in the vice presidential debate, is that these are very, very different tickets. And of course, you have the reality that Vice President Pence is way better at defending President Trump's record than President Trump is, and Senator Harris spent a good bit of the time answering the question about Vice President Biden about his health by saying, hey, I'm ready to step in and do this if
Well,
I need to.
Well, that of course brings in the second reality, John, and I have to correct myself because earlier I said it was Edwards against Palin. It was actually Biden himself against Palin, because I remember her saying, "Oh no, Joe, say it ain't so." But and it, I just get these elections mixed up. But the other reality is that, I mean, look at the top of both of the tickets. These two vice presidential candidates are more likely than your average vice presidential candidate to end up president, depending on who's elected. I mean, both of the presidential candidates are really old guys, and there's a distinct possibility that Vice President Pence or Senator Harris will have to take the reins. And so I think America was probably looking at this, I know I was, as a bit of an audition for a potential possible future president, at least more possible than the typical vice president is. And that's why their answers are so key on here. You note things that I think Pence really pushed Harris really well on the abortion question, for instance, where she has to deal with the reality that she's taken, and her party has taken, a wildly extreme view on that question. And of course, Senator Biden has moved very far left in just the last few months on this issue. He's not. It doesn't seem like he's by temperament a very extremist, a very extreme person on the abortion issue. But his party has pushed him in that direction. Where once he said, "Well, I'm only for this, and the other type of abortion." Now he's for basically abortion on demand for any reason at any time, because that's the party platform. And you see
Well,
that.
that's the thing he's dealing with on all kinds of issues: the
Yeah.
economic issues, the relationship with China, the relationship with Iran, certainly climate change, the Green New Deal. Is that he is in a there's a really fragile alliance between the old member of the party here, who is the the presidential candidate, and the up and coming far left candidates that are really, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, Kamala Harris, for example, defending her record as a prosecutor in California. Every other Democratic candidate on the debate stage during the primaries, except for Biden himself, went after that record as being unfair to minorities. That's an interesting thing. Kamala Harris was forced to defend fracking. AOC immediately tweeted, "Fracking kills people." This isn't a, there's a really fragile alliance. We see obviously the division in the conservative side of things, but there is a division in the Democratic side of things. The unity, it's not unlike what it was in 2016, where the unity on the right was really caused more by Hillary as a candidate than Donald Trump as a candidate. And right now, the unity on the left seems to be much more driven by the current president than it is the potential that Joe Biden's going to get in office.
You mentioned court packing a moment ago, John, and I think that's probably illustrative of a tendency we're seeing on the Democratic side in a lot of areas. That's interesting to me. It's the tendency to want to change the rules, because the game hasn't been going in a way that's favorable to the extreme liberal base of the party, and so they want to sort of change the rules. Court packing is something that's been brought up before in U.S. history. FDR famously threatened to do it, but this would be adding members to the Supreme Court in order to sway the balance, because things have not shaken out well for liberals on the court in the last few years. President Trump has gotten two and a half. The third one is pending, appointments to the court, and that's changed the landscape of things. And then the second rule that it seems, I don't think this is mainstream in the Democratic Party yet, but it's certainly gaining steam, is this movement to modify the way elections happen. Back when I was in the youth and government program at YMCA, a bunch of different kids my age brought up at the national conference, they brought up this proposal to abolish the Electoral College. And on some level you can say, well, that's just a silly thing that teenagers and high schoolers come up with. But I'm seeing it become more mainstream, even among some of the new blood in Congress. I don't know whether I forget whether Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has courted the idea, but it's certainly something that is gaining steam, and that's a rule. That's would be a radical rule change in order to change the
Oh, look,
outcome. Because
if we have the same outcome as in 16, where the president
oh
wins the
man,
electoral college but loses the popular vote, are
right?
you kidding? No, that will be a top primary, a primary objective of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
They do that. I mean, look, they're facing the consequences right now of having changed the votes on on court appointments from 60 down to 50. That is making this current nomination process of Amy Coney Barrett a possibility. That in and of itself is allowing 3 Supreme Court justices to be named by this president. I mean, look, that is a legacy of this presidency that's going to last for a really, really, really long time. And there's literally nothing that can be done about it except changing the way the court is done. And of course, we remember, I'm old enough to remember, using the courts and it's certainly engines of liberal orthodoxy like the ACLU using the courts in order to bypass the legislature. And now the complaint is the Republicans are using the court to bypass the legislature. I mean, the rule changing here is really interesting. So I do think it'll be a priority of the Democrats if that's the way this election shapes up. But it's hard to tell. I mean, who's ready to predict the outcome? I mean, right now the polls are dreadful for the president, but they're more dreadful on the popular vote side than the electoral college side of it, right? And swing states and really competitive states, some of those gaps are actually narrowing. And October is an eternity. There's a ton of stuff that can happen between now and then. It was the Access Hollywood tape. If one remembers that, how dramatic that was in 2016, which of course was immediately followed by, or 2015, 2016, which was immediately followed by the, revelations about Hillary Clinton's email servers. You know when that happened in 2016, Shane?
The email servers?
No, the Access Hollywood tape revelation and this.
It was like a couple of weeks before the election.
No, it was this week. It was this week in 2016.
Man, I remember thinking that was it. That was the election was done. And then next thing you know, we're sitting watching the returns come in. I can remember the New York Times had this the returns page where they were counting the votes, and they had this little speedometer thing that would move right or left depending on who Hillary or Trump was getting the most electoral votes. And I just watched it swing initially over to Hillary, and I'm like, this is it. But then it starts steadily going back over towards Trump's name, and then next thing you know, people are declaring him the winner of the night, and it was very, very surprising. So I made a rule that night that I would not predict the outcome of any future election. So I'm not making any predictions. I know what the polls say, but we'll just see what happens.
Well, no, that's right, and we'll see if there's any other debates. That is something that could move the needle, especially if either of the presidential candidates learn from their vice presidential, running mates. That maybe, as far as this campaign goes, the one who is quieter and allows the other candidate to hang himself might be better off. So we'll see what happens and all that.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this to talk about more of the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. Stay with us. We're back here on Breakpoint this week talking about the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. I'm Shane Morris, and I'm here with
Except that first segment, Shane, I just want to jump in because that first segment was a whole lot of political stuff, and maybe
it was. And guess what we're going to talk about now? More political stuff.
But this has a Christian worldview perspective. I mean, it's kind of like that fly on Vice President Pence's hair. You just couldn't look away, and so the events of this, the political events happening, you just can't look away.
Well, I mean, this is something that has to do with an issue that we've tracked since the very beginning here at the Colson Center. I can remember when, Chuck Colson was talking about religious freedom, and this phrase that the Obama administration used, freedom of worship, and he was one of those pointing out very early on that freedom of worship is a much more restricted thing than freedom of religion. And there were a lot of critics who sort of said, you're just making a mountain out of a molehill. It's just a synonym. It's just a change of wording. But it's not a change of wording, because freedom of worship means that we think that we can just go to our churches, and inside those buildings we can do what we want. We can be Christians, but outside those buildings we got to behave the way the government says we have to behave. We can no longer be, fully fledged Christians living out our faith in every area of life. And that distinction became extremely sharp in the years following Chuck's death, especially with the Obergefell decision, which legalized gay marriage. I should probably say imposed gay marriage as the law of the land in all 50 states. And that created, we've said many times before, that created just a disaster for religious freedom. And we've seen the cases. They've made it to the Supreme Court. Bakers and florists and pastors and county clerks and all kinds of people who have had their faith clash with this new definition of marriage. Well, one of those was Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis, if you remember back a couple of years ago. And the Supreme Court just made the decision, the U.S. Supreme Court, to deny an appeal of her case from the lower court. However, alongside that decision, Justices Thomas and Alito wrote with the denial of this remarkable accompanying opinion. And they said very bluntly that Obergefell has had, quote, ruinous consequences for religious liberty. And that because of Obergefell, believers in traditional marriage are easily labeled bigots, making their religious liberty concerns that much easier to dismiss. And the reason is really simple, John. Go back to the wording that Justice Anthony Kennedy used in the decision, and then the arguments. He spoke of anyone rejecting this new definition of marriage or same-sex relationships being solemnized by the government as a person motivated by irrational animus. I mean, he actually put his thumb on it there and said, this is the only reason why you could possibly object to that. And the court is a moral teacher. It really sets the tone on these issues. And we've seen exactly that. The complaints against religious objectors to the new same-sex orthodoxy written in law have been labeled bigots. Their objections are not treated in good faith, and they're not treated as legitimate claimants to the constitutional right of religious freedom. And so the justices, at least two conservative justices here, are signaling that this is an issue they hope the court will take up again in the future and sort of define exactly what the boundaries are of religious liberty and how believers in traditional marriage still have a place in our country, protected in law.
This is a stunning thing. I didn't realize how stunning it was when I first saw it until I really started to dig in. I'm going to quote from what they wrote. By choosing to privilege a novel constitutional right to same-sex marriage over the religious liberty interest explicitly protected in the First Amendment, the court has created a problem only it can fix. That is a remarkable statement. What's included in that statement? First, Supreme Court justices critiquing the court's decision. That is something that you hear from Alito and Thomas every once in a while. But you don't usually hear it in an immediate dissent. You don't usually hear it looking back in the past, right? This year's one of the most important cases was Chief Justice Roberts defended it on the idea of stare decisis. In other words, we don't overturn precedent very easily. For them to look back and go, the court created a whole big mess. That's first thing. The second thing that's huge. They said that the court chose to privilege not just one constitutional right over another, a novel constitutional right. They're clearly talking about the fact that Kennedy invented something. Now, Kennedy was really good at inventing stuff, right? He invented penumbras and all kinds of things. We certainly had it in decisions having to do with abortion. But here is a novel constitutional right, one that is just not there, one that was invented by this decision. And also that religious liberty is explicitly part of the Constitution. So not only that one constitutional right is privileged over another, but a manufactured constitutional right is privileged over one that's in the very First Amendment. Now, this goes to the point that you made at the very beginning of what you said. And I want to go back just to clarify it for everyone, because it was really important. The idea, because the idea here is whether religious freedom is the ability to believe what we want and practice it in our own homes and in our own hearts and in our own houses of worship, or It's actually the ability to live out our deeply held beliefs in our public lives within certain boundaries, within certain reasons. And that includes in our places of employment. That includes in how we run our businesses. That includes in how we interact in the public square. That's what makes this so interesting. Because as recently as a couple weeks ago, we've heard from a very outspoken writer who is a genius on religious liberty typically, and I really appreciate it. I don't want to throw him under the bus, but because of his concerns about the presidential race, say religious liberty is in great shape because the court keeps defending religious liberty. Apparently, Justices Alito and Thomas disagree that religious liberty is all that safe. I want to point that out. Second, it has to do with this distinction, Shane, because this commentator that talks about religious liberty being safe and in good shape because the court keeps ruling in that, the cases that are cited all have to do with religious institutions being allowed to be religious institutions. It all has to do with Trinity Lutheran. It has to do with the Espinoza decision. And yes, these are great decisions because they ensure that if you're a religious institution, you don't get penalized just because you're religious. But what's completely lost in all of that is the religious freedom of individuals in the public square, not the rights of a Trinity Lutheran school to be a Christian school on their own property and then to have access and not be automatically disfavored in government programs. This was the case of Kim Davis. Now, it's important that Alito and Thomas did not think that this case was worthy of considering. They did not disagree with the decision to not take up this appeal. They agreed with the appeal. But what they said in this decision, and that's what makes it so remarkable, is please give us something else because the court created a mess and we have to fix it. And we're not going to be at rest as a nation. And I'm adding words here, but you can kind of see it. We're not going to figure this out.
You can hear the invitation in what they're
writing.
No,
it was a direct invitation.
Yeah.
Let me just read it again. I just thought these words were incredible. By choosing to privilege a novel constitutional right to same-sex marriage over the religious liberty interest explicitly protected in the First Amendment, the court has created a problem that only it can fix. Now, a lot of us expected in the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision that Justice Kennedy, who was apparently the sworn enemy of animus, was going to try to figure out how to work this out. And that he was going to see this as a legacy, go into the setting sun, I'm going to balance religious freedom and so on. But no, what he wanted to do was get rid of animus. So just like he got rid of the so-called animus, of anyone who's against same-sex marriage, he turns around and gets rid of the animus against religion that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission clearly showed, but never actually ruled on how you balance these rights, what you deal. Alito and Thomas are saying religious freedom is not okay, because we have a court that allows, and let me just quote it again, that basically refers to believers in traditional marriage, or at least allows them to be easily labeled bigots. And that makes their religious liberty concerns easier to dismiss. So in other words, the privileging has already taken place. Religious liberty is not in good shape, particularly when it comes to the rights of individuals to order their public lives around their deeply held beliefs. The Kim Davis case apparently wasn't the case they were looking for. It did not have the same sort of issues, and there's a whole lot of new legal nuances there. And again, the court's really hesitant to make these sweeping decisions on cases where there are these nuances or special circumstances or mitigating issues or whatever. But they invited it. And I think it's a remarkable thing because it does, I think, challenge the narrative that religious liberty is okay. Apparently, Alito and Thomas don't think it is.
Fantastic. We're going to take another quick break. We'll be right back after this to talk about more of the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. Stay with us. We're back on Breakpoint this week, talking about the stories of the week from a Christian worldview perspective. John, one of the other stories this week that caught all of our attention was a story we've followed for several weeks. And it was the Netflix movie Cuties, this French movie about a bunch of 11-year-old girls who join this dance troupe and start twerking. And the imagery for the movie and the content of the movie and the subject matter was just, I think, rightly derided as normalizing and sexualizing children, normalizing a sort of a pedophilia, a visual pedophilia. It was truly revolting. It was awful, and I was hoping that somebody would stand up to Netflix on a legal level, and it seems like somebody has. Netflix Incorporated has this week been indicted by a grand jury in Tyler County, Texas, for promoting material in its recent Cuties film, and then it goes on to quote this statute, which prohibits basically it's a child porn statute, and it prohibits not just explicit pornography, but any sort of obviously sexualizing image of children, and that's the sort of thing that this movie undeniably does, according to the indictment, which was handed down back in September 23rd, actually, but we just found out about it on Tuesday. Netflix did knowingly promote visual material which depicts the lewd exhibition of, and then it goes on to name, body parts of partially clothed children who are under the age of 18. So I'm wondering what's going to come of this. Obviously, Netflix is a company with a lot of legal resources at its disposal, but I think it's a good message to send that even a grand jury on this kind of local level is calling them out for what they've done here. I think there should be legal consequences. I would be happy, honestly, to see executives pay hefty fines or go to jail for this, because it was truly revolting, and it needs to be dealt with.
Well, the fines are going to be small just because of the sort of charge that it is, and unfortunately, the fine. And of course, I'm talking about local Texas law here, and I
Right.
saw some descriptions of that. I mean, we're not talking about anything that would bankrupt a company like Netflix, for example. But I tell you what, if 500 other small little town, or counties in Texas and Kentucky and Tennessee and Virginia and Michigan and everywhere else did the exact same thing because Netflix distributed child pornography in their jurisdiction, then suddenly it is a death by 1,000 cuts. And I think that that's what needs to happen. I'm so grateful for the courage of this grand jury to do this. And it's shameful that it actually needs to be called courage, but it really is, because there is this snide dismissal of how bad this really is that we have seen from film critics, we have seen from media moguls, we have seen from Netflix themselves, from NPR. Oh, you just don't understand license, and oh, you're just prudish. We're actually exploring the issue of the sexualization of young girls. I mean, this is what we're hearing, and of course, it doesn't actually make a strong moral conclusion. It just shows a young 11-year-old girl eventually deciding to go back to her conservative parents because of her own self-discovery, not because of any sort of protection that she needs against the forces that actually sexualize her. This reminds me, by the way, of British Prime Minister Tony Blair. I think it was Tony Blair who tried to initiate just some level of controls over internet pornography in Britain and was roundly criticized. And the reason he was doing it was because of violent crimes against young minors that were sexually driven and clearly influenced by brutal pornography. And all he wanted to do was say, you know what, let's set the default setting from the internet companies of pornography sites to off unless people actually request them. And you would have thought he was Big Brother. It was an amazing sort of thing. So I just am grateful, because here's the data that cannot be justified away by cultured film critics, some of whom claim to be Christian, or appeals to artistic license. The girl who played the 11-year-old girl in the film, who was twerking, looking at hardcore pornography on her phone, portrayed in a sexually suggestive way multiple times in the film, was 11 years old in real life. And a condition of her employment in this film was that she behave in these sexually exploitative ways. How is that not child abuse? How is that not child pornography?
Yeah, it fits every definition conceivable. Um, what you mentioned, the general, defense of pornography and the pornification of our culture. I don't want to get into another story here, John, but there was one that just irked me this week. We've got pretty credible rumors that Amazon, and they're developing a series based on the Lord of the Rings, is gonna they're hiring an intimacy coordinator to basically put together Game of Thrones style nude sex scenes in Middle Earth. And I mean, the outcry from fans over this has just been tremendous, and it just infuriates me, not just as a fan of Tolkien's work, and I know he's got to be rolling over in his grave over this, but it's indicative of a larger trend toward an obsessive prurience. Is that the word? An obsessive need to see everything and to sort of uncover everything, to rub our faces in the details of depravity. And I think it really makes for horrifically bad and dehumanizing television. And the primary, I mean, it's on two levels. First of all, because of what it does to us as we watch it. It makes us
Mhm.
voyeurs. It cheapens sexuality for us. It turns us into these creepy people who are sort of looking through. I mean, you would never do this in real life. You would never watch this stuff, but because it happens on TV, you think it's okay. But on the other level, the same thing is true that what you said earlier about the actresses in Cuties. The same thing is true of adult actors and actresses. These people are actually doing this stuff. These are human beings created in the image of God, John. They have
Right.
souls. They're being paid to get into morally compromising situations
Mm.
in order to make money, and we're paying them by watching the material. The fact that they would corrupt something as beautiful as Middle Earth and the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien is sickening to me. I hope the fan backlash sort of shuts it down, but it's part of a larger trend, and Cuties is sort of um, the frontier there. But it's
Yeah.
tremendously frustrating to me.
I want to link again on our show notes here to the breakpoint we did about Cuties a couple weeks ago, because I think it's important, even with your story about Middle Earth being pornified. I even think there that what's being reflected there is a worldview shift that it's taken place in our culture, where we literally can't imagine a world of meaning, of purpose, and even in the case of this, of adventure and mystical realities, unless there is this sexual freedom that's part
Mm.
of it. That's part of the idea that life itself is about sexual expression, sexual autonomy, sexual orientation. That's what I struggle with about Cuties, right? And I said this, and I said this earlier, that the girl makes the right decision and leaves this twerking girl band and goes back to her conservative Muslim family, but she doesn't do it for moral reasons. She does it for self-authentication. And the next Cuties movie, which there will be of some form or some name,
Mm.
she'll make a different decision, and it'll be her parents, who learn more about their daughter, who has revealed who she really is. And I'm so sorry, honey, for not, and that'll be the next Cuties. And then the next Cuties, it'll be Glee. So it's, this is what you're seeing, I think, with Middle Earth. It's almost like there's a group of people so committed to the sexual revolution, has so convinced us that you actually can't have all the wonderful, meaningful, uh, 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 deep truths of Middle Earth that Tolkien reveals over and over and over, unless there's that sort of sexual autonomy in the mix.
Yeah. John, the last story I want to hit this week is the subject of a breakpoint commentary that you did. And I just thought this was a fantastic reminder that the top of the ticket, the presidential race, is not the be all end all of this election, and that there's really important stuff happening down the ballot. And one of those things is local initiatives, local referenda, things that we vote on as citizens that are put directly in front of us, and that we can use to affect meaningfully our community. And in fact, some of these will be more meaningfully impactful to our lives than the presidential race will be to many of us. So walk us through a few of those, John, because you gave some great examples from around the country. And I think it'll be encouraging to our listeners to who may be discouraged about the state of the presidential race, to get out there and vote.
Yeah, and I don't even want to measure the importance versus the presidential race. I mean, I think the presidential race matters, and I think all the other ones do too, right? So we have to hold all that together. And it's not just the ballot initiatives, although that they do as well.
You're going to shut down my localist push there.
No, not a bit. I mean, look, if there's a localist, I'm a localist, and I absolutely agree. I quote Mel Gibson in The Patriot all the time: "Aim small, miss small." But let me just read what I wrote. For almost all of us, this election features incredibly important decisions all the way down the ballot. For example, I bet Amy Coney Barrett has a new appreciation for how important Senate races are right now, right? I mean, this is where her future lies. Ask Colorado State troopers if their lives have changed since a particular ballot initiative passed in 2016. Guess which one?
Was that the medical marijuana or
medical
marijuana? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, it's a different culture than it was. And by the way, it's not just that, but healthcare has changed because of doctor-assisted suicide. Ask the parents, and this is a new story, where you used to live, Shane. Ask the parents of Loudoun County, Virginia school children if school board elections make a difference. The school board there just mandated that teachers had to sign on not to disagree with any of the wokeness of that if they wanted to keep their employment. And basically, the idea of academic freedom, remember the good old days of the Scopes trial when the ACLU defended academic freedom? Anyway, things have changed, right? So my point is, a school board election, and that's an election that's on the ballot in Loudoun County, has dramatic differences, as does state referendum, as does the Senate races. So we talk about local legislatures, we talk about state ones. I didn't even mention, for example, in Denver, for example, the thing that has made Masterpiece Cake Shop owner Jack Phillips' life a living hell for now 8 years is a civil rights commission that is not elected, but is appointed by the governor and by members of the state legislature. So you put that together, and suddenly all these elections matter. All these decisions on the ballot matter. But I really wanted to bring attention to the ballot initiatives. Let me just give you some of these stats. These are really, really, really big. There will be 110 ballot initiatives decided by voters on election day. 110. 76 of them will decide whether or not to make permanent changes to the constitutions of various states. I mean, that's huge. Here's an example. Colorado, a yes vote on Prop 115 will prohibit abortions after 22 weeks of pregnancy. We are one of 8 states left here in Colorado that has later term abortion. We have a famous abortionist who performs 200 or so a year. He did when he was in his prime. He has written books on it. He celebrates it. Not quite to the degree that Willie Parker does, but he celebrates it. Look, the decision here will literally save lives.
And what an ability to directly change things. I mean, we do so much wrangling over the Supreme Court because of this far off, sort of difficult to foresee possibility that some case might reach the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade and the rights that it circumscribed might be restricted or changed in some way, or maybe even, who knows, God willing, overturned. In this case, John, voters can actually go to the ballot box and fairly directly vote to save lives. That's a marvelous
and talk about local control over things that could be uncertain on the federal level, right? So what happens with Roe v. Wade? One of the state ballot initiatives in Louisiana is trying to prepare for that, basically amending the state constitution about whether or not there is a legal right to an abortion or for state funding of abortion. It's called the Love Life Amendment. That's huge legal groundwork that either could be a challenge to Roe in the future or could be, in the case of Roe being overturned, set up future. You've got recreational or medical marijuana or both on the ballot in 5 states right now, including South Dakota. I can't figure that one out. Plus there's no masks in South Dakota to block the smell, so that it's gonna double the effect, I guess. In Nevada, you've got sports. In Nevada, They're talking a fundamental change in the state constitution about marriage. South Dakota legalizing sports gambling. You can get this. Utah voters are going to decide whether in the Constitution the language becomes gender neutral or not.
Wow.
That's going to have a huge impact on where state funds go in terms of all kinds of other things. But you also have direct ways to protect kids. This is a really interesting one in the state of Washington. So back in March, the Washington State Senate voted to mandate comprehensive sex education across the state. Comprehensive sex education in Washington then would start in kindergarten and introduce explicit conversations about sexuality and sexual behavior starting in the 4th grade.
And the curriculum will probably be written by an entity like Planned Parenthood or
absolutely,
or someone like that.
Now, so the vote here is about whether this is going to go. And so the confusion here is that if referendum 90 passes, that approves the decision of the Senate. So a vote no on that is a way to protect 10-year-olds from learning LGBTQ inclusive sex curriculum and behavior.
Right.
So look, a couple things here. These are going to have direct impacts on people's lives. These are clear and direct ways to love your neighbor, right? Your preborn neighbors, your 10-year-old neighbors in Washington State, your particularly vulnerable neighbors to gambling in, Utah or Nevada or whatever. But it's also very, very important, Shane, to understand the language of these initiatives. There have been plenty of voters who have voted the wrong way because these things are confused. And this is one of the big battles going into whatever appears on the ballot. It's not only that it appears on the ballot, but how it's worded. Because because you can read it and go, wait, should I do yes or should I do no? I'm grateful, by the way, for all of our friends at the family policy councils. I know there's a wonderful family policy council here in Colorado, a terrific one in Arizona. In fact, in states, I just spoke for the one in Connecticut. All over America, there's wonderful ones that issue these voter guides. Ohio, Florida, North Carolina. There's a lot going on in North Carolina.
So that'll take out the double negatives and put these initiatives in English so you can actually know how you should vote and don't miss one word not or something.
No, that's right. They won't tell you how to vote. They'll just say, look, if your outcome is this, you want to vote yes.
Here's
if your
what
outcome
it means.
is no. Yeah, that's right. And you need some of that. And I'm grateful that I think groups have gotten a lot better at being clearer on language than they have in the past. But these things really matter. And so come to breakpoint.org, by the way, and we'll link you to the Breakpoint. It aired on Thursday of this week, called the Ballot Initiatives of 2020, a way for Christians to love their neighbors. We sum up a lot of these ballot initiatives. We provide some links to know what's happening in your state and the difference that makes, including an article, 2020 Ballot Measures, a preview, which you can find. What is that website? NCSL. I'm trying to remember what that is. The National Conference of State Legislatures is what that stands for. And so you can just see kind of a whole preview of everything that's happening, including what's happening in your state.
It's a great resource. Breakpoint.org, folks. Let's slide into the recommendation section here of the Breakpoint This Week podcast. I want to recommend this week something that I've enjoyed for a number of years now, and it's an audio Bible. I know Max McLean's audio Bible is sort of like the gold standard of this, and it's what you'll find if you go on a lot of the websites, and he's done basically every version there is. But I want to recommend another audio Bible, and it's by the actor David Suchet, and he's only done the NIV so far. Many of you will know him as Poirot from the detective series. I know him first of all as the voice of Aslan from the Focus on the Family Radio Theater Narnia series. So when I discovered that Aslan read the Bible and I could get it on CDs, I did that. I just got the Audible version too because it's a little more accessible for me to have it right there on my phone. But
can I just say that right now the homeschooling dogma is living loudly.
Is living loudly in me. Yeah, right. Exactly. If I help me if I have to go before hearings and answer questions on this stuff like Justice Barrett or future Justice, Lord willing, Barrett has. No, I love David Suchet's work here because I think he gets something about reading the Bible. I don't know. I think, he claims to be a Christian. He's got some views that I might not agree with. I watched documentaries with him where he talks about Peter and Paul and he makes some remarks about biblical archaeology that make me think, okay, he's maybe a little bit on the more progressive side there, but his performance makes it clear that he understands the emotions, the meaning, the significance of all these texts that he's trying to get across. You know, when he does the Psalms, he doesn't just read them in a monotone. When it's a despairing psalm, when David's in the, you know, the pit of death and he's asking God why you sent him down to Sheol and why his enemies are sleek and prospering and stuff like that, he's, you know, he's got this deep rumbling voice and he's just sort of, you can almost hear it cracking, like he's about to break out weeping. When it's triumphant, when the trees in Isaiah come out of the to clap their hands and the hills break forth in rejoicing before God, you hear the rejoicing in his voice. And then, of course, when he voices Jesus, it's just it's fantastic. So, really recommend that resource. You can get it on Audible. And I think the CDs are still available somewhere. They were out of the UK, and I had to convert from dollars to pounds when I bought them back in the day. But it's a really good. I've enjoyed it a lot. My whole family has.
Well, good. I want to recommend a video. I've been a fan of the Bible Project now for a while. I think they just do a really terrific job. And they have a wonderful set of videos. We've actually added them to the Colson Fellows curriculum as part of that journey. It's just, in kind of a certain order. But there is a video that they have, and I want to recommend it as a way of recommending something, maybe bigger. Last week I recommended repentance, for example. I want to recommend Sabbath. I want to recommend Sabbath as not just a good idea because it's helpful to get a nap, one day a week out of 7. I want to recommend Sabbath because I have become convinced that it's literally baked into the universe like gravity. Like it literally is the way the world goes. And it is part of the created order. You hear Jesus talking about that. You certainly hear the defense of it in the Old Covenant that way. But there is a wonderful video that's part of the Bible Project, and we'll link to it at breakpoint.org, on rest and how Sabbath rest is actually a meta-narrative theme that is more than just, God going to his people. I tell you what, here's what I want you to do. I want you to rest on the 7th day. But that it actually is baked into the created order, and it points us to the restored new heavens and new earth, and that it's reflected in the person of Jesus himself. And to get that kind of theological worldview grounding on it. And by the way, I'm going to recommend a book on this too from my friend Matthew Sleeth. The book is called 24/6, in which he makes very much the same case and talks about what it actually looks like to live in this rhythm. I don't know anything that'll put you on a different kind of rhythm from our culture than right now than just doing that. It's just kind of a good pace. And this video is really helpful about that. The book 24/6 is really helpful. It's been a cool thing that we've added to our family. It's been something in a sense we've added to the Colson Center as an organization. We sometimes we're pulling our oxes out of ditches, but I tell you, we are, we have a policy, don't email each other on, Sunday afternoons. And the reason is, you might be catching up on emails, but, we don't want anyone else to feel pressure, in order to do that. I don't make calls and do that sort of stuff on Sunday afternoons if I can avoid it at all. Not to mention, obviously, it's good for family time and everything else. But it is when you see how it baked in it is, Shane, it's a remarkable thing when Jesus comes up and just claims to be Lord of the Sabbath. When he's just like, yeah, we're going to do it on Sunday now instead of Saturday. And, it's just a remarkable thing that ends up happening. And it actually is a new creation taking place. It's these scents and smells and images of a new creation taking place because of Sabbath. So my recommendation is Sabbath, the rest video, the Sabbath rest video from the Bible Project in the book 24/6.
Listen to this Anglican sounding like a Westminsterian Sabbatarian here. You're speaking my language now, John.
Hey, we Anglicans do this as well. So we've started on a Saturday night to Sunday night rhythm in our household, just because it's great not to go into church on Sunday morning, having looked at Twitter for an extended period of time.
That's so great.
And then it also gives you a little bit of margin going into Monday morning. So it's good.
Does this video give you the explanation for why the Christian Sabbath is Sunday, not Saturday?
It does, and okay. It has to do. I mean, it's more obviously the resurrection is on there, and that really Jesus rests in the tomb through Sabbath. So all of that's happening. He actually obeys the law in a sense while he's dead and before he raises again. But it has to do in this teaching, and I'm compelled by this line of reasoning, that the seventh day Sabbath is baked into the created order, and the first day of the week Sabbath is baked into the new created order. Now we're going to get, we do have some, brothers and sisters within some Adventist movements that we may get some emails on this, and perhaps from some Messianic Jews, which I know don't always see that the same way, which is fine. But I tell you what, it's a great theological wrestling match. And I think we can certainly agree that God set apart that day, and that it has something. It's not just kind of a random do I want people to work every day of the week, or do I want people to rest one day? I'll give them a break. It actually is the way things were structured in the world. And so, yeah, there you go.
What a great recommendation. Thanks, John. Well, that does it for today, folks. Visit breakpoint.org for links to all of the stories and resources that we've mentioned today on the program, as well as a wealth of always fresh resources to help you think and live like a Christian in today's culture. For John Stonestreet and for the Colson Center, I'm Shane Morris. We'll see you next week.